A 22-year-old beauty married a 65-year-old man. But after a month, she saw his true colors and her life turned into a living hell. When I tell people I married a 65-year-old man when I was 22, I see the judgment flicker in their eyes. They don't have to say a word. I see them do the math, picture the difference, and paint me with a single ugly brushstroke. A gold digger, a girl who traded her youth for a life of luxury. For a while, I almost believed it myself. Almost. But they never knew Arthur. Not the Arthur I met, anyway. He wasn't some stooped, frail old man. He was timeless. He had this thick silver hair, always perfectly styled, and eyes the color of a stormy sea that seemed to see right through you. He stood tall, wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my parents' car, and he moved with a quiet confidence that made every other man in the room seem like a boy. I met him at a small, independent coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. I had just moved to Arizona from Ohio a few months prior, trying to escape the small-town life where everyone knew your business before you did. I was working as a hostess at a high-end restaurant, feeling lost and incredibly small. One afternoon, I was sketching in my notebook, a habit I'd had since I was a kid. He was sitting a few tables away, reading a thick, hardcover book. He came over, his smile warm and genuine, and asked about my drawing. It was just a silly sketch of a cactus wearing a hat. I was embarrassed, but he talked about it like it was a piece of fine art. He asked my name. He listened when I spoke, really listened. Not like the guys my age, who were just waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. With Arthur, I felt seen, heard. That one coffee turned into lunch the next day. Lunch turned into a week of dinners at places I'd only read about in magazines. He bought me a vintage silk scarf because he said it matched my eyes. He took me to the symphony, explaining the movements and composers with a passion that was infectious. He never once made me feel like I was just a pretty young thing on his arm. He made me feel like his equal, his intellectual partner. My friends back home were skeptical. "Chloe, he's older than your dad," my best friend Sarah had said over the phone, her voice tight with concern. "What do you two even talk about?" "Everything," I'd replied, a little defensively. "Art, history, music. He's brilliant. And he's so kind to me, Sarah. You should see the way he looks at me." And he did. He looked at me like I was a miracle. When he proposed 3 months later on a private balcony overlooking the Sedona Red Rocks at sunset, with a diamond that seemed to capture all the light in the world, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. I was in love. Or at least, I was in love with the idea of him, the life he offered, and the way he made me feel. The wedding was a small, elegant affair at his sprawling Scottsdale estate. Marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a perfect, manicured garden, and an infinity pool that melted into the desert horizon. It felt like living inside a movie. My life, which had always felt so messy and unsure, was suddenly perfect. The first month was a dream, a gilded, sun-drenched dream. Arthur doted on me. He'd have breakfast waiting for me every morning. Fresh squeezed orange juice and croissants flown in from a bakery he loved in Paris. He'd leave little notes for me on my pillow. He filled a room he called my studio with the finest paints, canvases, and art supplies, encouraging me to paint again. "An artist like you shouldn't be stifled," he'd say, kissing my forehead. I felt cherished. I defended our life to my family, to myself. The age gap didn't matter when you were truly connected, I told myself. This wasn't about money. It was about a meeting of souls. I was happy, genuinely, blissfully happy. But a dream, by its very nature, isn't real, and eventually, you have to wake up. The first crack in my perfect world was so small, I almost missed it. It was my phone. My old, slightly battered iPhone was my lifeline to my old world, to Sarah, to my sister Jessica, to my mom. About a month after the wedding, Arthur presented me with a brand new, top-of-the-line model in a sleek black box. "A gift, my love," he said, his smile as warm as ever. "So you have the best of everything." I was touched, but when I turned it on, I realized it was already set up, fully loaded. And my old contacts, my photos, my entire digital life, it was gone. I had my assistant transfer everything important, he explained smoothly when I asked. I got rid of all the clutter. A fresh start. Fresh start. The words echoed in my head. He had gone through my phone. He had decided what was clutter and what was important. I felt a tiny, cold knot form in my stomach, but I pushed it down. He was just being thoughtful, I told myself. He's organized, meticulous. It's part of his charm. A week later, Sarah called, excited. "A few of us are thinking of flying out to see you. We found cheap tickets for next month. We can't wait to see your palace." I was overjoyed. The thought of having my friends here, of blending my old life with my new one, was thrilling. I told Arthur that evening over dinner. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes shifted. "That's a wonderful thought, dear," he said, carefully cutting his filet mignon. "But that's just not a good month. The entire house is being rewired. It will be chaos, perhaps in the spring." The spring. That was 6 months away. The excuse felt thin, flimsy. Why wouldn't he want me to see my friends? The cold knot in my stomach tightened. "Oh," I said, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Okay, I'll let them know." I didn't want to seem ungrateful, but when I walked past the study later that night, I overheard him on the phone. "No, absolutely not. It's out of the question. Postpone it." His voice was different, hard, cold. All the warmth was gone. It was the voice of a CEO giving an order. The next morning, he suggested I get rid of the worn-out jeans and band t-shirts I'd brought from Ohio. "They don't really suit the lady of this house, do they?" he said, chuckling softly as if it were a joke. But it wasn't a joke. He had his personal shopper come the next day with racks of designer clothes, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers. All beautiful, all expensive, and none of it felt like me. I felt like I was putting on a costume every morning. The Chloe from Ohio was being slowly erased, replaced by this elegant, quiet woman who lived in Arthur's perfect house. Then came the issue of money. I never had to ask for anything, not really. The house was stocked, the cars were gassed up. But I didn't have a credit card in my name. I didn't have a bank account of my own. Every few days, Arthur would leave a crisp stack of $100 bills on the marble countertop in the kitchen. "For your little outings, my dear," he'd say. It felt less like I was his wife and more like I was his employee, collecting my weekly allowance. One afternoon, I tried to make conversation with our housekeeper, Maria. She was a quiet woman in her 50s with sad eyes. "Your garden is so beautiful, Maria," I said, hoping for a moment of normal, friendly chat. She froze, her hands stilling over the folded laundry. She glanced nervously toward the direction of Arthur's study. "Mr. Vance has an excellent landscaping team," she said, her voice flat and formal. Then she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the cavernous hallway. I was a stranger in my own home. The staff didn't see me as the lady of the house. They saw me as another one of Arthur's possessions, and they only answered to him. The loneliness began to set in, a deep, pervasive ache that no amount of luxury could soothe. I was surrounded by beauty, but I was utterly isolated. I spent my days wandering the silent, echoing halls, walking through the perfect garden, painting canvases that I had no passion for. I realized I hadn't had a real, unguarded conversation with anyone in weeks. Every call with my family felt stilted. I knew Arthur could be listening. He had gifted me a beautiful vintage-style phone for my studio, but after the incident with my cell phone, I was sure it was monitored. I felt a creeping paranoia, a sense that I was constantly being watched. The breaking point, the moment the slow creeping dread turned into sheer panic, came when Arthur dismissed my desire to take an online art history course. "But why?" he asked, his brow furrowed in faux confusion. "You have me. I have an extensive library. I can teach you anything you wish to know. We can study the masters together." He wasn't offering to help. He was asserting his control. He wanted to be my only teacher, my only source of knowledge, my only connection to the world outside these pristine, white walls. In his eyes, I saw it clearly for the first time. I wasn't his partner. I was his project, his doll, a beautiful object to be curated, controlled, and kept on a shelf. The love I thought I saw in his eyes was just the pride of a collector admiring his most recent and most prized acquisition. My life wasn't a fairy tale, it was a cage. A gilded, beautiful, and utterly inescapable cage, and I was trapped inside. Arthur had to go on a business trip to Japan. It was for 5 days, the longest we'd been apart since the wedding. As his driver Ben pulled the sleek black car down the long driveway, I felt a wave of something I hadn't felt in months: relief. The silence in the house was different. It wasn't the heavy, watchful silence I was used to. It was empty. It was freedom. For 2 days, I did nothing. I wore my old jeans. I ate cereal for dinner, straight from the box, sitting on the $1,000,000 sofa. I listened to the loud, messy music of my youth. I felt like myself again. On the 3rd day, an official-looking letter arrived. It was about finalizing some visa paperwork for my move to the state. It required a copy of my original birth certificate. I knew Arthur handled all our documents. He was meticulous. He kept everything in his study, a room that was his sanctuary. It was the one room in the house that was always, without fail, locked. I knocked, just in case, but of course, there was no answer. I tried the handle. Locked. My heart pounded. I needed that document. I started searching his desk drawers in the shared living space, looking for a spare key. Nothing. Then I remembered something he'd said once, laughing, about how sentimental he was. For his main computer password, he used the year he founded his first company. And for everything else, he used the year he was born, 1957. A ridiculous, insecure password. But for a man as arrogant as Arthur, it made sense. He would never imagine anyone would dare. I walked back to the study door. This one had a modern keypad lock next to the handle. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. 1957. The little light on the panel flashed green, and I heard a soft click. The door swung open. The air that hit me was cool and smelled of old leather, wood polish, and him. It was a masculine, intimidating room. Dark mahogany walls lined with books, a massive desk, and a single leather chair facing the door, like a throne. I felt like an intruder, a spy. I started looking for a file cabinet, my hands clammy. Tucked away in a closet, behind a row of neatly hung suits, was a large black metal safe. It had a digital keypad just like the door. My breath hitched. This had to be it. I typed the code again. 1957. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside, there weren't folders labeled taxes or deeds. There were manila folders, about a dozen of them, each neatly labeled with a single name. A woman's name: Isabel, Sophia, Anya, Eleonora. And then, at the very front, a newer folder. My name was typed on the label in stark black letters: Chloe. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my folder, my fingers trembling. It wasn't filled with my birth certificate or our marriage license. It was thick. The first page was a comprehensive background check on me, dated 4 months before I ever met him. It detailed my family's modest finances, my grades in high school, even notes from a private investigator who had interviewed people in my hometown. Then there were surveillance photos. Me walking to my waitress job. Me sitting alone in that coffee shop, sketching in my notebook. That meeting, it wasn't chance. It was an audition. I was selected. The final document was the worst. It was a contract, a pre-drafted legal agreement titled Personal Companionship and Lifestyle Arrangement. It outlined the terms of our relationship, a monthly stipend, the cash he left on the counter, a list of duties, including social appearances and household management, and a termination clause. It stated that after a period of 24 months, or at his discretion, the arrangement could be dissolved with a one-time severance payment. This wasn't a marriage. It was a 2-year contract for a live-in companion. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I was dizzy. I grabbed the folder next to mine. Isabel. Inside was a photo of a young blonde woman smiling brightly, and the same contract, the same background checks. I frantically opened the others. Sophia, Anya, Eleonora. All young, all beautiful, all with the same terrifying set of documents. Some folders had termination papers signed and dated. I wasn't the first. I wasn't special. I was just the latest model, the newest replacement in a long line of disposable women. The entire foundation of my life, my love story, crumbled into dust in that cold, dark room. It was all a lie. The gentle smiles, the thoughtful gifts, the shared passion for art. It was all a performance. A script he had played out time and time again. I wasn't his wife. I was an employee he had meticulously vetted and hired for a job. And my employment had an expiration date. The air in the study suddenly felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. Panic, sharp and cold, clawed at my throat. I grabbed my folder and Sophia's, the one right before mine, and stumbled out of the room, leaving the safe wide open. I didn't care. I ran to my bedroom, my pristine, white and gold prison, and threw a duffel bag on the bed. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely zip it. My passport, the old, hidden cell phone I'd cleverly kept at the bottom of a winter boot box, a change of clothes, the faded jeans and t-shirt he hated. The costume was off. I needed to get out. Now. I didn't even have my car keys. He kept those in a lockbox. I was a prisoner. My only hope was my sister, Jessica. I ran to the kitchen and used the landline, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew he might have it bugged, but it was a risk I had to take. "Jessie," I whispered, my voice cracking when she answered. "I need help." I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a frantic, garbled mess. The contract, the other women, the lie. She didn't question me. "Okay, Chloe, okay, breathe. I'm looking at flights right now. The first one out of Phoenix to Columbus leaves at 6 a.m. Can you get to the airport?" "I don't know how," I cried softly. "He has the car keys." "Take a cab, an Uber, anything. Just get out of that house. I'll have a ticket waiting for you at the counter. Go now." As I hung up, I heard a soft creak behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Maria, the housekeeper. She stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, her face a mask of sorrow. I braced myself for her to call Arthur, to stop me, but she just looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not an employee, but a woman filled with pity. She stepped forward and silently held out a small, worn envelope. I took it hesitantly. Inside was a wad of cash, a few $100s. I looked at her, confused. "He is not a good man," she whispered, her English accented and heavy. Her eyes darted around the kitchen. "My cousin, she was here before you. Her name was Sophia." She pointed a trembling finger at the file I was still clutching in my hand. My blood turned to ice. Sophia. The smiling girl in the photo, not just a predecessor, Maria's family. "He ruined her," Maria said, her voice choked with emotion. "He promised her the world, and then he threw her away like trash. Please, you go now, before he comes back." She squeezed my arm, a moment of startling, desperate solidarity. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall as silently as she had appeared. The kindness from this woman, this stranger bound by fear, was the final push I needed. Arthur hadn't just broken hearts, he had destroyed lives. And I was next. My escape felt like a scene from a thriller. I used the money Maria gave me to call a taxi from a rideshare app on my old phone, telling them to wait at the end of the long driveway, out of sight of the house's security cameras. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of the desert wind sounded like footsteps. I didn't take anything of value, not the jewelry, not the designer clothes. I left the diamonds and the silk behind. They weren't gifts, they were chains. All I took was my freedom. The flight from Phoenix to Columbus was the longest flight of my life. I sat huddled in a window seat, watching the sprawling, golden luxury of the desert give way to the flat, gray, familiar fields of the Midwest. The contrast was stark. One world was a beautiful lie, the other was a simple truth. That simple truth was home. Jessie was waiting for me at the gate, her face pale with worry. The moment I saw her, the dam broke. I collapsed into her arms, sobbing. The grief and the terror I had been holding back for days poured out of me. She just held me, stroking my hair, murmuring, "You're safe now. You're home. I've got you." I'm back in my childhood bedroom. It's small. The walls are still painted the pale lavender I chose when I was 15, and it's cluttered with books and old photographs. It's a world away from the sterile, minimalist perfection of Arthur's mansion. and I have never felt more at peace. The documents I took are with my sister's lawyer. I don't know what will come of it. I don't want his money. I don't want revenge. I just want to make sure he can't do this to another girl, to another Sophia, or another Chloe. Sometimes at night I think about him. I don't feel hatred anymore, just a profound, chilling emptiness. He wasn't a monster in the way you see in movies. He was something far more terrifying. A man who saw other human beings as objects to acquire, display, and discard when they no longer pleased him. I was a fool, blinded by charm and luxury. I let him rewrite my life, edit my personality, and try to erase the person I was. But he failed. Sitting here, in my old jeans, looking out at the familiar Ohio street, I know who I am again. I am not the lady of a Scottsdale mansion. I am not a collector's item. I am just Chloe. And for the first time in a very long time, that feels like more than enough.